Human rights. Um, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, yeah, I don't. I'm not sure where to begin. I mean, I'll start. I'll start by saying I value human rights. It's almost my base for my approach to learning and living and teaching. Um, so I'll start there. How do they fit into public education and into this course? How do they fit into democratic education? How do they fit into your lives and work? I think those are the questions I want us to explore and think about in terms of human rights. I want you to read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR. I want you to highlight what fits and highlight what fits for you. And hopefully, I believe there will be a lot. Highlight what doesn't fit. Also, maybe what doesn't seem to be valued, talked about, adhered to, considered currently, or in places where you're passionate about or involved. Think about current events around the world, locally, in our country, and human rights, and where we see human rights being valued, and how and by whom, and where we see them being violated, and how and by whom, and try to follow those thread backward, and connect back to schooling and education. I think that's the key here. I think that's what I want you to be thinking about. Um, I you'll see me look over at my notes too. This is one of those videos that I don't re-record every video every summer, or every semester, but I do re-record some, and this is one of the ones I re-record. Um, I think I watched one of the videos from 2 years ago, and I noticed that I was going on a rant about Black Lives Matter, and defund police. I'm not going to go on that rant this summer. I do Black Lives Matter, defund the police, COVID-19, how we have responded, how we, those things all are part of human rights. Um, for those, I will just say, for those who support Black Lives Matter has gotten completely out of control. I think in terms of, the method, the movement, the politicization of, bumbled that word. I, Yet, I think at its base, these movements are based in human rights, and human rights organizations will say, we we support when a group, is marginalized, when a group's human rights have been violated, be that historically Native Americans, females. I mean, the list goes on, right? Native Americans are a very important thing to consider. First Nation people in this country, um, and it's not as simple as all lives matter. That's oversimplifying it. It's way oversimplifying it. Each and every life matters. Okay, let's start to talk about that, and then let's talk about the fact that some lives, um, are seem to be valued differently by different organizations, and treated differently in different ways. I noticed on NPR this week, the wage gap in the United States, the black white wage gap has shrunk over the past few years, and that's an interesting thing to consider. Where that fits into human rights, I'll let you go there. I'll talk a little about the economy in a bit. Um, how do these things fit? And any movement, okay? So moving away from that, anything that's going on, where non-repression and non-discrimination, right? Where are human rights? They ought to be at the center, of this, and I think some of you are starting to consider that. I, I recently, when I think about human rights, also, and I said I don't know where to start, and I meant that. I mentioned the somewhat recent movie, The 13th, uh, to a couple of you recently, and this is not to push, the views represented in the movie or the message of the movie necessarily. I, it it opens questions for me about, again, human rights historically in this country, which I want to question, and um it brings to mind for me human rights in the prison system, the for-profit prison system. It brings to mind the school to prison pipeline, the slavery to prison pipeline. I mean, there are a lot of, issues, stories, data that we can track there, and I want you to consider that stuff. I don't want you to be blind to it. I want you to be aware of what's going on. human rights organizations exist, and I bring up human rights because I just have trouble. Honestly, so there's some opinion in here, right? It is the content of the course for sure, in terms of Palmer's work, in terms of democracy, in terms of issues in equity and education. Go back to your issues board that we made on the first day of class, right when we came in, and we came in and put all those micro issues on there. Um, it I, a lot of these are human rights, or start as human rights, or let's go back to human rights when we think about them. Um, just consider. So historically, there's been a focus on certain groups. There's poverty all over the globe. There's oppressive regimes have been all over the globe, and if we view them through a human rights lens, and if we view what's going on contemporarily through a human rights lens, I think we get a different take, and then we connect back to schooling, right? Um, other things to consider. I think I've already brought up trade agreements and lobbying groups, the restriction of human movement, immigration. These are big topics in our country and in our world, and not just who restricts the movement of other humans, how and why, or how, because there are sociopolitical reasons that, and I know this goes outside the country, but what has caused folks to need, want, feel like they must move, and then other folks restrict their movement, and that is, um, if we've got to get it from human rights, and we got to come back to schooling. So I'll get to there. I want to bring up real quickly, and this, I don't always bring this up here, but I think it feels relevant this summer more than I don't know, more than it feels relevant this summer. The Reggio Emilia approach to schooling. I've brought it up a couple times in class. I've sent it, but I'll give you a brief history. After World War II, in a place in a region called Reggio Emilia, Italy, Loris Malaguzzi, who's a psychologist by trade, he and this is an area that had relative wealth, so that's important to note. But they had just seen they coming out of World War II, they wanted to promote compassion, care, empathy, and I can quote, and I wrote this quote down today because I don't normally quote, but it's a progressive way of educating. We have Reggio Emilia schools in Boise and in Idaho, but um, they operate under the assumption that children begin to form values and unique personalities during the early years of childhood. They begin to express ideas in a variety of ways. Yeah, yep, they do. So the focus is on each and every child. And a key to the Reggio Emilia approach, the reason I bring it up as this video starts to go long is, um, it, they talk about the rights. They have rights a lot. The rights of children, the right to learn. Think about that. We have a right to learn. The rights of teachers. Teachers have rights. Yeah, yeah. Um, what does that mean in terms of expulsions, detentions, suspensions, discipline in schools? Um, we have a right to learn. This brings me back to incarceration in this country, really. It brings me back to thinking about how we treat humans in schools, right? How kids are often dehumanized. It makes me think about restorative justice. I've mentioned to a couple of you. I'll send a link and email to others. I don't know if anyone reads those, but restorative justice as an approach to discipline in schools. Um, Reggio Emilia, they're just coming. They've seen the horrors of a fascist regime, and they want kids to have a more empathetic approach to living, not to learning necessarily. That's part of it. Not to schooling, but just to living. Let's be more empathetic, community based. Clear connection between school and society. We see the fascist regime. We see what the atrocities and horrors that are happening, and we look now. Again, this is putting a lot of pressure on schooling, and that's something we have to talk about and on teachers. But we look to schooling to create and maintain a different type of humanity, different type of interaction, different type ways of being. So I love that, and I want you to think about it. And think about the decisions you make on a daily basis, right? Where do non-repression and non-discrimination come into your decision-making process? Why would anyone oppose human rights? And that's a question I really want to ask. Why would anyone oppose human rights? Think about who, or that's where I guess that's where I want you to be. That's what I want you to be thinking. Um, Values, right? Um, Trade agreements, all the different things we talked about. Um, Decisions made, and I'm shifting my notes here. Decisions are made every day that violate human rights, for sure, right? But in favor of what? I posit that in favor of efficiency, in favor of the almighty dollar, perhaps, and that listen, I I come from relative privilege. I do. I live in privilege, and so um, I I have to recognize that as I talk about these things. I I I understand the value in material goods. I am not. This is not like a rant against capitalism necessarily, or a rant against money or like material goods. I just ordered myself a couple new pairs of running shorts and I'm really excited about them. And I don't mean to be flip there. Like I'm oversimplifying, but I think, and I've talked about this in class, we want to in Western society, we tend to dichotomize way too much, right? So when I talk about decisions that violate human rights and I ask questions like, how do we sleep at night? Um, if we believe that money is more important than human rights, or we see that others, or that we've contributed to something that values money over human rights. And I say, are humans expendable? And of course, when I talk about that, like conversations sometimes go to, well, how many humans are like, oh, it was only 10 humans in this case. As soon as humans become expendable, all kinds of alarms go off. And I'm making this connection to the economy because I don't think it has to be either or. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like we can't have a strong economy and value human rights. We can't attend to human rights and have a strong economy. Like if we want to have a strong economy, people are just going to live in poverty. No, I mean, I think wealth would probably be distributed differently. We'd probably live and learn differently if we focused more on human rights. I mean, but I don't want to dichotomize. Why can't we have both? And I want you to ask that question and wonder, because that's often it's often an easy answer and a straw man argument, right? Like, well, so we could attend to human rights to each and every human. We could in schools on an individual basis at the micro level, and in American society at the macro level. But here's what happened in terms. No, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an economist, honestly. But I want us to wonder and ask those questions. I want us to look at what we're doing in schools that is more based on the budget. And I get it, right? Some of you brought up, recent bonds and levies, and maybe if we in this group start to infuse some human rights conversations into those conversations, it changes the conversation. It changes the path. Um, Humans are not expendable, but some would say their budget is not expendable, and this isn't just outside of schools, y'all. It's about how we educate kids within society. It it I'll stop. I've gone way too long. This is more than a minute. This is too many lectures and a little bit of a rant by AJ. I actually attempted to cut this down this summer. Yeah. So here's where I'll end in terms of human rights. I've tried to draw some connections or draw some things for you to think about. And I know I hope it gets some of you riled up. I hope that I poked at some things and gave things too short of airtime and suggested things that get you going in terms of virtues and values. Good. Let's talk. Let's think. Let's operate. Let's act. I want to leave you with this. It is currently June 20th, and yesterday, June 19th, the Human Rights Council, which is part of the UN, is meeting right now. It's the 53rd, I think. I think it's the 53rd session of the Human Rights Council. You can go to web. Let me double check, make sure I have the right address here for you. Webtv.un. Well, it's actually media.un.org web TV. I mean, if you just type in United Nations Human Rights Council, it's UN Web TV, UN Web TV. You can tune in and see what's being talked about. They're meeting right now. It's live right during this course. It's really cool. If we met in person, I'd have us attending and watching. And we're back in the Human Rights Council for the first time since 2016, I think. We pulled out, the United States pulled out of the Human Rights Council as of 2017. The current administration, we rejoined in 2022. So we've been back for a year. But 5.5 years of not being in the UN Human Rights Council. Very interesting to consider. Sociopolitically, why did we pull out? Why are we back in? Do you think we should be part of an international? I'm sure some of you have opinions on the UN, where it began, how it exists, what it does, and that's wonderful. This week, I want you to think about human rights, and there's a really good opportunity to pay attention to what's going on internationally in terms of discussions about human rights violations and approaches that could value human rights across the globe, connected back to what you do on a daily basis. Thank you for listening and giving me grace in going too long. I hope you find the relevance of this. Have a great day.